Martyn Evans is creative director of UNI, the specialist regeneration developers, and he's also deputy chair of the London Festival of Architecture, which started this week. Martyn, can you tell me how the pandemic has impacted on your work, and just how do you see the effect of it over the coming months?
Well, it's affected our business, I'm sure, like most people's, in that we all scattered as soon as, well, before, in fact, the government announced the lockdown. I think we wanted to make sure we could, if it was going to become official policy. We seemed to do that quite well, and I think we were a bit surprised about that. And I think in talking to colleagues and professional partners in the last 3 months, people have felt the same. Our technology was such that we were capable of scattering easily and working at home, most of us. And so I think that bodes well for general working, that people could quite easily shift away from an office. We've, of course, right from the beginning, talked about how that was going to impact on our business and on what we build and what we design. We make mostly large mixed-use commercial and residential schemes. And so all of life happens in our schemes, and therefore, however this thing was going to impact on our lives, it was going to impact somehow on what we do. And I think rather than where we've landed is, rather than imagine that some unexpected new thing is going to happen, for us it's about seeing this time that we've been locked down and a recovery time as an opportunity really to be able to do better and quicker that which we have always wanted to do. And I think that that's pretty much true for all of us. And so most of the conversations I've been having with people are about quality of life for everybody, quality of life for people who work in offices, quality of life for people who are stuck at home all day. And how does this thing taught us something new about that, about the way to look at it? We're so ingrained in this 9-to-5 office culture thing, and suddenly that's gone. And so our company, there were some grumbles in our company about having to go down away from the office and lock down at home, about how that would badly affect productivity. And it hasn't. And in fact, I wonder whether it hasn't made it a little better. And so it's meant that people in our company, I think, have felt they can trust everybody to go away from the office, don't have to see somebody at their desk to imagine that they're working. That's a good thing. And in our company, I'm sure that wouldn't be the case, but I'm sure in many companies with much larger workforces, with lower paid workers, that's probably a very large part of the feeling of every day being at the office. If you're visible, you're working. I think that's blown that out of the water. People are responsible. When they go home, they work. And there are other ways of keeping motivation up and productivity up. So I think it's about work-life balance. It's about a sense of community. We've all been stuck in our homes, but I'm an NHS responder, for instance, and every now and again my phone sirens, and off I have to go and usually collect a prescription and take it to somebody I don't know. Knocked on all sorts of doors in my community in the last few weeks of people I've never met before and handed them their medication, and you can tell when somebody answers the door if they're lonely or need to stand 6 feet away from them and have a quick chat. It's quite nice. So I've enjoyed that. I have a typical London experience of not really knowing my neighbours very well. I've gotten to know them all very well from 6 feet away in the hallway in the last 10 weeks. We all work. We're hardly ever here at the same time other than to sleep. So I sense a feeling of a deeper understanding of community and what it means to have a better, more personal-centred life. And I think that we in our company are learning that that's what we've got to pay attention to for ourselves and for the places that we build.
So, I mean, just before lockdown, you launched the huge Mayfield scheme in Manchester, which is a master plan by Studio Egre West. So with a project like that, how do you ensure it remains relevant in such an uncertain world? I mean, is it back to the drawing board?
Not quite, but certainly it's very central existence is questioned as to whether what we're doing is right. We've done with all of our schemes. What's been interesting is that the process hasn't so far really been impacted. We got our planning consent just for Christmas, so that was not unaffected. But we're just about to go to planning committee in Southwark on a very large scheme on Southwark Street on June 15th, at a process that Southwark Council have very effectively been running their planning committees online now. They're a bit ginger about, a bit nervous about it at the beginning, but it's worked well, and so they've programmed a whole range of meetings. We're out in the market looking for funding for that scheme now. We're having as many meetings online as we would have had if people were coming to the office. At the moment, our process is not impacted. That's the delivery process of the scheme. Of course, we're thinking about what happens. And so in phase one, we're in detailed design on one of the buildings with Bennett's. And the design meetings there hasn't been a single meeting where we haven't referenced this thing and talked about what the front door is. We had a revolving door. There's a long debate about whether we keep a revolving door. So in detail moments, big discussions. But of course, we're building offices in Mayfield that no one's going to sit at a desk in, even if indeed they are going to sit at a desk, for 10 years at some point later down the process of this huge scheme. Certainly in our earliest buildings, not for 2 years. Who knows what somebody's going to do in an office in 2 years' time, given that we all thought we were fine at Christmas, we knew what was going to happen this summer. Well, we were wrong about that. And so I think the only thing that you can do in that situation is be flexible. I was just reminding myself, I'm writing a piece for AHMM for a book at the moment, and I was just reminding myself of their white collar factory process over the weekend, and understanding that very clever idea of Simon Alford's back at some years ago when they started to develop this thing of refurbing old buildings for Derwent. Simon talks very eloquently about how those turn of the century or early 20th century commercial buildings were built to be flexible, because at that time technology was changing so fast. Large flexible floor plates so they could move machinery around, high ceilings and big windows that opened so that as they got more and more machinery that became more and more busy and hot, they could ventilate the spaces. Well, of course, those are qualities that we want in our buildings now, high ceilings and big windows that open, because we don't want to put air conditioning in, big open floor plates to have flexibility. So I think we know what to do. It's happened before. And so flexibility, we're certainly looking at things like the scale of floor plates, so that if the market at the moment says, typically in large new buildings, somebody wants 75,000 square feet. If somebody wants 35,000 square feet, you've got to be able to chop floors in half. And so you've got to be capable of doing that. But of course, that is sensible anyway. We're building a multi-storey car park in Manchester, in Mayfield, having lots of discussions about what that building's going to be in 25 years' time, because it's probably certainly not going to be a multi-storey car park. And so what are we going to do? Tear it down? I don't think so. And so we're going to turn it into an office or into flats. And if you do that, well, then you have to change the notion of typical multi-storey car park design, because very low ceilings, split half floors, not suitable for flexible repurposing. So very interesting, that, and very interesting and in a nice way challenging to architects and designers.
Good, well, that's good to hear. I think flexibility and adaptability is perhaps one of those things which is being an acceptance of it being accelerated by COVID-19, as have other positive aspects of, and one of those you mentioned was community spirit, and another one is a growing realization. We've realized it some time, but we haven't done enough, and that is, how do we create a more equitable city? How do you think we can learn from what we're seeing at the moment to drive a better city for all citizens?
I think that it's about putting high up the agenda. You know, our schemes, like many others, are made by a collaboration of a large number of people who all sit around a table, typically with a blank sheet of paper, and discuss, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this place? And if you're building a building that's got different ground floor and upper floor uses, how are we doing this? As long as enough people around that table are committed to thinking in a different way, it'll happen in a different way. So we're talking about a scheme, I just came off a meeting talking about a scheme in a semi-rural suburban location, different for us. We've literally a field, and so we can do what we like in it. And so I said to somebody in that meeting, so what's the presumption about social housing? Because we can have that conversation from scratch. So are we making an absolute presumption that in this scheme, social housing will be pepper potted and not identified and be completely integrated, so that we start from saying we have a mixed community and that we work out a way of doing that, rather than accept this is the way that it has to happen, and how do we shoehorn a design into delivering what's the acceptable way? And I think that we feel emboldened maybe to put our foot down and say, this is how we want the end result to be. You clever people, go away and work it out. And this very short period of time, even though it feels like quite a long time, this short period of time that we've been in this situation is so dramatic, I think it's allowed us to question everything. And that's hugely valuable to me. It's hugely valuable. There's a bit of every conversation where you're allowed to say, stop, which maybe there wasn't before. And I think out of danger comes great change. Yeah. You know, the French people didn't revolt because they had enough bread to eat, and so, you know, out of jeopardy comes an opportunity to make good change.
Good. Well, I'm glad you have an optimistic view of the outcomes. But this week...
My job to start the conversation to be optimistic. Whether we're going to get there or I don't know, but we'll try.
But this week sees the start of the Digital London Festival of Architecture, another major change brought about by COVID-19. But you've been a director and key supporter of the LFA for some time. And I heard that you'd like to see a Manchester event, MFA. So what do you see as the benefits of such festivals for cities?
I also started and run another organisation called the Young Architects and Developers Alliance, and we have similar ambitions for that, to take ourselves out of this focus of London and go where other people are doing other things, perhaps more interesting than the things that are happening in London. But honestly, we know that if you want to make change, you've got to talk. You have to find people to have conversations with, and you have to build a constituency of interest. And so at the LFA events, at the NLA, at all of those organisations where we gather and debate the great ideas that drive our industry forward, those are the places where change will, those are the crucibles of change. And so it can't be stuck to this city. I mean, this government has talked about pretty much nothing else before the coronavirus problem around Brexit, about how we need to level up our country and move investment out of London and up the M1 and head north. So we have to get our heads out of London too, and we have to. And I know that from spending, before we were on lockdown, half my week in Manchester every week. It's a different place outside London, and we have to get there and understand it and imagine that there's great change there. Many years ago, I worked in the Northeast for a while. I worked with one of the regional development agencies called One Northeast. And the first time I went there and sat with them, I think the guy who ran it was used to people coming from London and telling him what to do or offering him advice. And so he would get in there first and sort of get a dig in. And he said, you know, we too look north and east. And I thought he meant making some joke about, you know, the northeast. And he said, you know, our business is more likely to come from across the North Sea than it is to come from the Midlands and from the southeast of England. And so our faces are looking, you know, we don't care about you, we're looking that way. And when you live in this, work in the southeast, that would never occur to you, that is how life is more likely to be for success in that part of the world in the northeast. So I think it's upon us at this time now to see huge opportunity outside of London. and see these great cities. You know, if you ask people in Manchester, knowing that Birmingham is Britain's second city, if you ask people in Manchester, what's Britain's second city, 10% of them will say Manchester. The other 90% will say London. And so they have a very different view than we do about where life begins in our country.
Very good. Well, one day I look forward to attending the Manchester Festival of Architecture and being able to do that in person rather than digitally. But Martyn Evans, thank you very much for your comments and your insights into our current predicament. And I look forward to seeing the results of your thinking in Mayfield and other places. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure talking to you, Peter. Thank you.